Hello everybody and welcome to the Moose Trail. I'm your host, Chris the Moose Johnson, and today we got a very, very packed episode for you. That is right, we have Will Lewin in the Hot Hierarchy breaking down our college football power rankings. We have the Heisman Watch with Jake Gruwell, and we have Kyle Sparrow and Sparrow's Sensational Fantasy Breakdown. We got a very large episode for you today, and we got, of course, the NFL Breakdown with me. So don't go anywhere, stay tuned, and Will, why don't you start us off?
Thank you, Moose. It's always such a pleasure to hear your voice here on Saturdays. Will Lewin with the Hot Hierarchy going to start things off here in the football world, specifically the college football world. Week 12 of the college football playoff poll just came out, and I'm here to break it all down, put my own personal expertise, and comment on, again, those mistakes that we keep seeing week in and week out from the CFP committee. But it's so crucial now because of this 12-team bracket. Speaking of the bracket, we've got the visual for you this week. Make sure to stay tuned for the end of the episode, as you'll be able to see that here on the Hot Hierarchy. And dressed in all black today to kind of commemorate the end of a long road for the UNLV football Rebels. I'll go into that in just a second. But we're going to talk about teams ranked 11 through 25 in the CFP poll first. And leading the charge at number 11 is going to be Ole Miss and the Rebels there in Mississippi after their great win against Georgia, who's just a spot below them, moving down 9 spots. Boise State 13, SMU, Texas A&M, Kansas State, all with bye weeks, but only one of them moving up in the rankings. That's Kansas State to 16. We've got Colorado, Washington State, Louisville, and Clemson also moving up 3 spots to 17, 18, 19, and 20, respectively. Then we've got South Carolina making its first appearance into the playoff poll, with LSU, by some miracle, still in the college football playoff poll as well at 22, moving down 7 spots. Missouri, Army, and finally there's Tulane rounding it off for the playoff poll in 11 through 25. Let's head over to the Hot Hierarchy. I've got BYU there at the top spot, at 11. Then Georgia at 12. Both of those teams moving out of the top 10. We've got Army and Tulane right there at 13 and 14, clumped up just like how they are in the playoff poll. Then Clemson, a little more value for them in my eyes, at 15. Boise State not moving at 16. Louisiana, South Carolina, Texas A&M, Washington State, and Louisville all moving up spots in the Hot Hierarchy, making room for Colorado, Western Kentucky, and JMU making their first appearance into the Hot Hierarchy. Then we've got UNLV right there at the very bottom after their win on the road against Hawaii. Let's talk about some scores. The reason why I'm commemorating UNLV's season this early is because I think it's it. I look at Colorado State's schedule, I look at Boise State's schedule, and there's not really any room for error for either team. There's no reason why they should be losing any of their last games. Colorado State would have already played their game against Wyoming on Friday, but I do believe that that will be a win for the Rams. And again, Boise State, just the same amount of a cakewalk for them, but they are higher up in the rankings. They're at the 13th spot. Meanwhile, I have them at 15. You look at that win against Nevada, only by 1 score. Not what I thought would happen from the Broncos against that team up north, but nonetheless, the Wolfpack do keep it close, and maybe some questions do need to be raised there. We talk about teams like Georgia and BYU. This is exactly the reason why I had Ole Miss so close to the top 10, is because I knew they'd win. Let's be honest, I knew they would win. And now in the playoff poll, we see Ole Miss barely above Georgia at 11 and 12. We'll talk about why that's an issue in just a second. BYU at number 11, not in the top 10, but they are in the top 10 of the playoff poll. A terrible win against Utah, only beating them by a point on the road. Definitely not what the Cougars want, but you'll see where they end up in the top 10. We'll talk about them a little later on. Louisiana with a great win against Arkansas State, really putting their foots down. South Carolina, a good win against Vanderbilt on the road. That's a ranked win for them as well. Texas A&M with a bye week, much needed for them. Washington State, now with a pretty good win against Utah State over this last weekend. We look over to teams like LSU, Missouri, and Kansas State. Not really sure what they are doing in the playoff poll still. I mean, LSU have lost so many games. Kansas State have had way too many close games. And Missouri, the same thing. We'll be talking about a couple of those teams in our On the Block segment. But to move on to next week's slate, we've got this matchup against Georgia and Tennessee, and Ole Miss right above them with a bye week. Now, this is what concerns me. If Georgia not only beats Tennessee, but gets a good win against Tennessee, does that mean that in the same week that Georgia loses to Ole Miss, they are now ahead of Ole Miss? Like, I can understand you being ahead of a team that you lost to weeks later, but not days later. That is just unacceptable by the college football playoff poll, but nonetheless, there they are. So if Georgia do get that win, then arguably they'd be back in the top 10, but Ole Miss on a bye week do they have any reason to move into the top 10 as well? I guess we'll see this week. Boise State at San Jose State, going to be a very interesting matchup for the Broncos. I've been saying it for weeks now. The Spartans really doing damage at home, and I think they'll do the same thing here. SMU going to be playing Boston College at home. Arizona State going to be facing Kansas State. We're going to be talking a little more about both of those teams in our On the Block segment. We've got Washington State, Louisville, and Clemson all on the road. Not a lot of great matchups, 11 through 25. We do have LSU at Florida. I think that'll be the game that ultimately boots LSU out of the rankings. Florida should get the job done in my eyes. Meanwhile, South Carolina is going to be taking on Missouri, and South Carolina really just kind of acting as the team that is just kicking out the teams that are barely hanging on to their ranks in the college football playoff poll. They did that with Vanderbilt last week. I think they do the same thing against Missouri this week. And then Tulane going up against Navy. They had a dominant win against Temple last week, and this Navy game would have been a great matchup a couple weeks ago, but in recent events, Navy really kind of falling down in rankings and dropping a lot of losses this season. I don't think it's going to be as good as we may have hoped for it to be as we look over to the hot hierarchy. BYU having Kansas at home is kind of a big question mark for me. I do think the Jayhawks have a chance to get it done, but we will talk a little bit more about them in our top 10 segment, talking about BYU. We already talked about Georgia. Army with a bye week. It's going to be really good for them. See where they end up. Still an undefeated team in the American Athletic Conference, but again, Tulane also in the American Athletic Conference right behind them. I see a little more value in Clemson than the college football playoff poll does. I have them at 15. They're facing Pittsburgh on the road. Not an easy task for them. Meanwhile, Louisiana jumping past Boise State here. They're playing South Alabama. Should be a romp job in order for them to at least stay in the spot or maybe move up a couple of spots as well. We've got teams like Texas A&M playing New Mexico State. Alabama's playing Mercer. We'll go into that in the top 10. Not really sure why the SEC has these matchups these late into the season. And then going there at the bottom, new to the hot hierarchy, Colorado, Western Kentucky, JMU. They were all on the block last week. Great wins against New Mexico State, Georgia State, and Texas Tech find themselves in the rankings this week. They're playing Utah, Louisiana Tech, and Old Dominion on the road. Meanwhile, our beloved UNLV Rebels going to be at home against the San Diego State Aztecs. Let's go on the block here. We're going to be going through all 5 teams all at once here. First, talking about the Missouri Tigers. They're coming off of a very narrow win against Oklahoma and the Sooners. Again, that being by only a touchdown. And not past that, you're looking at an Alabama loss that's 34-0. I mean, Missouri, what are we doing? We've had so many close games. Get out of the rankings. San Jose State. Again, the only reason why I like talking about San Jose State is when they are at home. And they've got Boise State this weekend. Should be a very interesting match between the Spartans and the Broncos, especially since they're coming off of such a great win on the road to Corvallis and the Oregon State Beavers. They've been doing a really good job recently, hoping they can keep it up to give UNLV a chance at the Mountain West Championship. Then we've got ASU. ASU going to be going up against Kansas State this weekend as well. This is really a pivotal game for me, as if Arizona State is able to get this win, then it's more reason to kick Kansas State out and put Arizona State in. But if Kansas State are able to pull off what, in my terms, is an upset, I do think there is some questions to be held about Kansas State. They won't be in the rankings, but depending on how they win will determine on where Kansas State and Kansas State fold in the hot hierarchy. LSU, 2 back-to-back losses. They're a 3-loss team now. I mean, do I need to say more? They're getting trounced by these teams at home against Alabama. Death Valley is supposed to be one of the hardest places to play. Yeah, Alabama shut it down 42-13. And again, you're going to Kyle Field. They lose 38-23. I've been talking about Notre Dame. That win that Notre Dame had against A&M really kind of proves its momentum and proves that they are a better team now than when they lost to NIU all those weeks ago. And then Kansas State losing to Houston. You know who beat Houston? UNLV. I mean, if that doesn't speak volumes, I don't know what it takes, and not to mention a close win against Kansas. Not sure why they're still in the rankings, but they are. Let's move on to our top 10 segment. Leading things off is going to be the college football playoff poll, and of course, we've got Oregon at number 1 and Ohio State at number 2. They're not moving. Texas and Penn State move up 2 spots to 3 and 4. Indiana and BYU move up 3 spots to 5 and 6. Tennessee staying stagnant at 7. Notre Dame moves up 2 to 8. Miami somehow still in the rankings. Don't know why this is happening, but they are at 9. And Alabama all the way there at 10, moving up a single spot. They've got a good win against West Virginia on the road. Then we move over to the hot hierarchy. Oregon going to lead things off there at the number 1 spot. Texas going to be at 2. Indiana 3. Notre Dame 4. Ohio State 5. Then Alabama 6. Tennessee 7. Ole Miss 8. Penn State 9, and SMU 10, leading things off for the ACC. Let's talk about some scores. Oregon handling business, Ohio State handling business. Those two teams have been so dominant this season so far. Speaking of dominant teams this weekend, Texas really doing a good job with Florida. The Gators have really been a big dark horse upset in the SEC so far this season, but the Longhorns doing a great job at home handling their business there. Indiana with not as a great win as I thought it would be against Michigan and the Wolverines. Again, we saw that great performance by Oregon. I thought we'd see the same thing from Indiana, especially since they were at home. Not the case as they get that 20-15 win. Then we look over to the Notre Dame score, who just pummeled Florida State, making them yet the joke of the town, holding them to 3 points only. Ohio State, we already talked about them. Alabama, they go on the road to beat LSU by a staggering score of 42-13, and 2 spots below them is Ole Miss after their win against Georgia. This is why I have them so far ahead, because again, Ole Miss have that bye week. Even with the bye week and a good Georgia win, I only see Georgia moving up maybe 2-3 spots. I mean, SMU has a pretty interesting matchup against Boston College next weekend, and Penn State, they've been pretty they've been decent so far this season, but as we look ahead to the future matchups, Penn State is going to be facing Purdue on the road, which Ohio State just clobbered last weekend. Oregon's got Wisconsin on the road. Texas has Arkansas on the road. These are the 2 games that are very questionable for me. Both of these teams I can't see keeping it way more closer than they necessarily need it to be, and potentially 2 upsets there in the top 10. Indiana with a much-needed bye week. We already talked about BYU and Kansas. I do think the Jayhawks can get the job done. They've been really hot recently, have been doing a really good job against ranked teams with that chip on their shoulder. They are on the road, unfortunately. We'll see how Kansas is able to get the job done. Notre Dame playing Virginia doesn't really matter, and Alabama playing, I mean, we talked about Texas A&M playing New Mexico State, but Alabama playing Mercer. Come on, guys. Like, what are we doing? What is the schedule? You don't talk about strength of schedule. Indiana is the penultimate team talking about, oh, well, they haven't played anybody good. That doesn't matter. The teams that they are playing who aren't good, they are crushing them. They are doing what needs to be done. It's not about who they play. It's about how they play against those teams. And I'm so sick of the Indiana strength of schedule argument. We've got Tennessee going up against Georgia on the road. Again, Tennessee, this is a great opportunity for them to boost them in the top 10, or give Georgia the opportunity to come back into the top 10. Definitely not what we want, especially for Ole Miss, because in the college football playoff poll, they're just going to be passed up by the team that they just beat. Now, finally, let's go into the actual bracket. Here's the College Football Playoff Committee's bracket. So the way it works, all the teams highlighted in red are the teams that are winning their conferences. So you've got Oregon winning the Big Ten. They're at 1. Texas wins the SEC. They're at 2, even though they're the 3 seed. You've got BYU winning the Big 12, even though they're the 6 seed. They'll be the 3 seed in the bracket. And Miami wins the ACC, so on and so forth. You've got Boise State winning the Mountain West. Not sure if I agree with that. And then all the other teams that didn't quite win their conference championship, but still are in the top 10 or close to the top 10. We've got matchups like Alabama at Indiana, which would be very interesting, and even Ole Miss at Penn State. Potentially a whiteout game there for the Nittany Lions. Would be very interesting to see that, but we go over to the hot hierarchy, and this is how it's looking. We've got Oregon winning the Big Ten. We've got Texas winning the SEC. Then I've got SMU winning the ACC, and then BYU up there at the top winning the Big 12 still. I don't think that will be the case, but they're still leading for me in the Big 12. Then I've got Army as the 12th and final team in the bracket if they win the American Athletic Conference, as they are a higher rank than Boise State in the hierarchy. Looking at these matchups, I mean, Tennessee, Alabama, when has that not been a classic? Penn State, Notre Dame could pose a big threat since Notre Dame is at home, could take advantage of the Nittany Lions, and Ohio State hosting Ole Miss, big Big Ten SEC matchup there. But very exciting stuff, as this is what my rankings looks like compared to the College Football Playoff Committee. But that is going to do it for me here on the hot hierarchy. Certainly exciting times coming up as we slowly enter week 13. That's going to do it for me on the Moose Trail. I'm going to send it over to Jake, who's talking about the Heisman.
Thanks, Will. Welcome back to Heisman Watch. With only 3 weeks left in the college football season, the landscape of the league is becoming more clear by the week. This includes the short list of superstars that we have covered on this show that have a chance to lift up the Heisman Trophy in New York City. So for this week's episode, I'm going to give you my definitive top 4 finalists, and we're going to go down that list and talk about their season stats, as well as where I will see them going in the NFL Draft come later this spring. So without further ado, let's see my Heisman top 4. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. We got Travis Hunter, Dylan Gabriel, Ashton Jeanty, and Cam Ward. We've talked about them a lot on this show. I truly believe that each four of these players are unique in their own way and deserve the chance to lift the Heisman. So let's break down one by one where they are going to be and how they've done so far. So let's start off starting at the top of the list with Travis Hunter. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Travis Hunter on offense. He has been a machine with 856 total yards, 9 touchdowns, and 69 receptions. He has been a unit on the offensive side of the ball. On defense, he has been absolutely stellar. At the cornerback position, he's had 20 total tackles with 2 interceptions. I mean, the man can get it done on both sides of the ball. He's like the Shohei Ohtani of college football in reality. With the Heisman odds at plus 100, he is the favorite to land the Heisman Trophy. And when we talk about where his place is in the league, he is truly special. He will be the #1 overall pick. It doesn't matter the team. It doesn't matter what they're looking for. They know that Travis Hunter is special, and he is going to go #1 overall. So let's go on to the next player on that Heisman list, and that is going to be Dylan Gabriel. We talked about him a lot this season. After that Ohio State game, he really showed himself as a star in college football. Key word right there is a star in college football. We'll talk about that later. Pass yards, 2,848 with 148 rushing yards and 22 touchdowns, a QB rating of 86.7. With 350 odds to win the Heisman, he's looking like a good solid standout, but you look at that draft protection right there. 4th or 5th round, when I see Dylan Gabriel, he is getting older as a quarterback. I don't think that he is going to be all that great in the NFL. He'll be a great backup quarterback, but he's not looking like the person to lead a franchise. So that's my prediction for Dylan Gabriel. I really don't believe that he's the guy for the NFL, but I do think he is a stud in college football, as we see so often. Next is Ashton Jeanty. He is back on my list after being neglected a couple of weeks. The Boise State legend so far has been absolutely incredible, but has gotten limited snaps because UNLV laid out a blueprint of how to defend him. So let's look at his stats overall, though. With 224 carries, 1,700 rushing yards, and 23 touchdowns, looking at that average yard percentage, 7.7 yards per carry. He used to have a lot of breakaway runs, but now he's kind of getting more limited, but he is still a threat whenever he touches the ball. I don't think he's going to win the Heisman, but what I think he will win is a really nice NFL contract. Going early first round, he'll be the top running back that any team is looking for. Right now, eyeball test, I'd say the Cowboys are looking at him. It's typical for the Cowboys to take a Boise State guy, too. It's kind of in their trend. So we'll see how he does in the NFL. I think success is going his way. Last but not least, we have Cam Ward, the quarterback from the U. You know, they finally had their first loss of the year against Georgia Tech. What an upset that was, but that doesn't stop the stats that this man has put up. With 3,494 yards, 182 rushing yards, 32 touchdowns, and that really great QB rating. I still think he's the best quarterback in college football, despite what the odds may say. And I will say for his professional career, he is going to be a franchise quarterback somewhere in the NFL. With that early first-round draft prediction, I think he's going to be the first quarterback off the board. There is a sense of speculation that Shedeur Sanders might go first, but I'm really in a toss-up because I do think Cam Ward is the better quarterback. I think he can fit a lot of offensive play schemes for a lot of teams, and he's going to do very successful in the league. So with that, that is my top 4. As it gets closer to the season, we are going to look at the crystal ball and we are going to see where these teams might end up. It's still too early in the NFL season, but we're going to focus on where they are now and where they are going to end up soon. So thank you again for watching. My name is Jake Ruel, and this is the Heisman Watch. We'll see you next week.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another week of Sparrow's Sensational Fantasy Picks. As always, I'm your host, Kyle Sparrow. And this week, we have a couple players that just did really, really well this week. And let's just hop right into this segment. First off, I said it a couple weeks ago. I said Joe Burrow was going to have a monster game. And he did against it was a very good game between the Cincinnati Bengals and the Baltimore Ravens. Coming up later in the segment, we also have a couple more players. Became the number 3 fantasy ranked quarterback after week 10. 33.72 points against Baltimore. Had 428 yards passing and 4 touchdowns. That's what you get when you get Joe Burrow against the Ravens, and the Cincinnati Bengals also. Yes, they did lose that game to a couple of questionable calls. He's projected 18.7 points week 11 against the Chargers. My projection was right. I did say he would boom, and he did that indeed. So I have him as a stardom, obviously, because Joe Burrow and the person we're talking about in the receivers, they got a pretty good connection going. Next up, speaking of that matchup, we have Lamar Jackson, number 1 fantasy quarterback after Week 10 against, again, the Cincinnati Bengals. 32.9 points Week 10 against the Cincinnati Bengals. 290 yards passing, 4 touchdowns, 7 attempts rushing for 33 yards. I mean, Lamar Jackson continues to be the best. He can run, he can pass, he can juke, he can do everything. He's projected 23.8 points Week 11 against Pittsburgh. I do have him as a stardom because Lamar Jackson, he is probably the MVP frontrunner in my opinion, and he continues to just be the best quarterback. Next up, we have Kyler Murray, who has kind of emerged into the top 10 quarterback, maybe even top 5 quarterback situation. Became the number 7 fantasy ranked quarterback after Week 10, just under 30 points in fantasy with 28.74 points against the Jets, 266 yards passing, 1 touchdown. And here's where you get your fantasy points because Kyler Murray is a very good running quarterback as well. 3 attempts, 21 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He does have a bye next week, and as I said, he's entered the conversation for probably being up there with the top caliber quarterbacks. I have him as a stardom for Week 12 against the Seattle defense, as I don't think the Seattle defense could contain him in the pocket. Moving on. And here we go. I mean, Jamar Chase had an absolute nuclear game against Baltimore. Still the number 1 fantasy-ranked wide receiver after Week 10. 55.4 points against Baltimore. Get this, 11 receptions, 264 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Those are video game numbers, guys. He's projected 20.2 points Week 11 against the Chargers. I would say he's the best wide receiver in the league with those receptions and Joe Burrow and the Jamar Chase connection. We've seen it all year, and we're continuing to see it, and it keeps getting better. Obviously, I have him as a stardom. You'd be not smart to sit him. Next, we have George Pickens, who kind of had an underrated performance and is emerging in the Pittsburgh Steelers wide receiver room. It's kind of the number 1. He's a really good contested catcher. He became the number 18 fantasy-ranked wide receiver after Week 10. 20.5 points against the Commanders. 5 receptions, 91 yards, and had a beautiful, beautiful catch for that 1 touchdown. Projected 16.3 points against Baltimore. He's emerging, but that Baltimore defense is pretty dang good, so I have him as a sit-em. Next up, we have Calvin Ridley, who also had an underrated performance as the Titans are kind of not a good team or not the best team in the NFL right now. Number 26 fantasy-ranked wide receiver after Week 10. He had 25.5 points, though, against the Chargers. 84 yards, 5 receptions for 2 touchdowns. Projected 12.8 points Week 11 against Minnesota. And again, underrated performance. George Pickens and Calvin Ridley kind of flew under the radar in fantasy. So I have him as a stardom, as clearly he is the Titans wide receiver number 1. And kind of a guy that, again, 3 underrated performances besides Jamar Chase, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, number 105 ranked wide receiver after Week 10. Now, yes, he is a very low ranked wide receiver, but this week he showed out. He had 25.9 points against Atlanta, 3 receptions for 109 yards and 2 touchdowns, projected only 7.5 points Week 11 against Cleveland. But he's emerging as the wide receiver 1 for the New Orleans Saints, so for that reason, I do have him as a stardom. Moving on to tight ends, we have T.J. Hawkinson, who is back from injury and has played the past 2 weeks. He became the number 51 ranked tight end after Week 10. 15.2 points against Jacksonville, 8 receptions for 72 yards. He's only projected 11.8 points against Tennessee in Week 11. Slowly but surely starting to come back into the lineup for Minnesota, who is kind of on a downhill spiral right now as they were undefeated and have lost a couple games. I do have him as stardom, though, because T.J. Hawkinson is back, and I think Sam Darnold's going to give him more reps. And again, another person from this matchup, the Cincinnati Bengals and the Baltimore Ravens just had so many good people in fantasy this week. Mark Andrews, number 8 fantasy tight end after Week 10, 18.8 points against Cincinnati, 68 yards, 6 receptions, and 1 touchdown. Projected only 9.3 points Week 11 against Pittsburgh. He's a hit-or-miss tight end, though. Last week he didn't have a pretty good performance. This week he had a pretty good performance. I do have him as a sit-em, though, just because Pittsburgh, it's a divisional matchup. Pittsburgh is has a really good defense. And yeah, it's going to be a good game, though. Next up, we have Chuba Hubbard, number 6 fantasy-ranked running back after Week 10. Just under 25 points against the Giants, 28 carries, 153 yards, and 1 touchdown. And he's been consistent the past 2 weeks. I think he's starting to rise. As we know, we have Bryce Young, and the Carolina Panthers are kind of not that good of a team. I do have them as a sit-em, though, as that Kansas City defense, they are undefeated for a reason, and the defense is a big part of that. And then rounding out this segment, we have Bijan Robinson, who continues to be one of the best running backs in fantasy. Still the number 3 ranked running back after Week 10, 20.4 points against New Orleans, 20 carries, 116 yards, 2 touchdowns, projected 18.9 points Week 11 against Denver. He continues to be one of the best, as I said before. He's averaging 23 points throughout the past 5 weeks, and I think he is an obvious stardom. But yeah, that's all I have for you guys this week on Sparrow Sensational Fantasy Picks, and we'll see you guys next week.
Thank you so much, Kyle. And that, I had to go against Jamar Chase twice this week in my fantasy team, so it happens. It sucks having to go against someone that does that against your team, so not a fair week. But we got a lot to break down, though, for the NFL, not just fantasy, not just college football. So let's get right into it with our actual Week 11 current NFL standings. That is right. We have the Chiefs at number 1 at 9-0. We have the Lions at 2 at 8-1, and the Bills at 3 with 8-2. Eagles cracked the top 5 at number 5 with 7-2 record. The Pittsburgh Steelers and the Baltimore Ravens are both one spot away from each other. And of course, in the back end, we have the Broncos and Bears still holding on to the top 16. But that's not just all, because we have the back 16 as well, which is these teams right here, where we have the Rams taking over the top of the back 16. These are all the worst teams in the league, so it's hard to kind of look at them and see what they're going to do this year. Cowboys at 22, the Raiders at 29, and the Giants at 32. A lot of teams not doing too hot, a lot of teams getting close to being within the top 10. But before we go into that, we have a lot of games to recap, so let's get into it real quick with some of our most important games of the week. First, we have the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Washington Commanders. The Pittsburgh Steelers won the game off of a great offsides call by Russell Wilson himself, making sure the defense would jump, especially with a hard count at the end of the game. They really didn't need to jump. I was expecting for the Commanders team, I was saying to myself, don't jump. They're just obviously not going to snap the ball. And if they do, who cares? You're going to lose the game at that point anyway. And I think your defense is good enough to just hold up, even if the Steelers want to play. So very confusing for them to jump off sides right there. But that's not just the only game. We have the Chiefs versus the Broncos, which, I mean, hey, look, there had to be some type of voodoo magic, whatever's going on over there, because the Chiefs keep on pulling out wins that we don't think they should. The Chiefs got a blocked field goal at the end of the game that just made everyone lose their minds. I mean, who would have thought that the Broncos were going to have a chance at beating the Chiefs? But they did. So now we got to see what's going to happen this upcoming week when the Chiefs actually face a top 3 team in the Bills. But that's not all, because we have another team that was, hey, it was a little iffy for them at first, but they came back and they won that game, and that's the Detroit Lions. And the Detroit Lions are just an absolute grit and grimy team. They just love to get things done. They love to put in the hard work. No team I can really see stopping them anytime soon. That team is a Super Bowl team. I'd be surprised if anybody in the NFC really stops this team from making it to the Super Bowl. But that's just my own personal opinion on that. But that's not all, because we got to talk about our playoffs. And our playoff picture is a lot more interesting to go over, because, look, there's a few teams we're going to see in the top 10 of our draft picks in here that, hey, they're not going to be here really at the end of the year, but they're in the hunt right now. So we got the Chiefs starting off at number 1. We got the Bills at 2. We got the Steelers at 3. We got the Texans at 4. We got the Ravens at 5. Chargers and Broncos at 6 and 7 to round it out. The AFC West has 3 teams going right now, with the NFC North having 2 teams, and of course the East and South only having 1 team, while the Colts, the Bengals, and the Dolphins all are trying to claw their way back into this playoff picture. But I don't see it really happening for the Colts or the Dolphins. I could see it happening maybe for the Bengals, but I think it's time for people to start closing that door as well for them. They are close, very, very close to becoming a team that cannot lose another game. And that's including the rest of those teams in the hunt right there with 3-6, 4-6, and 4-6 as well. So it's like they're not really that good of teams. It's really shocking. The AFC's kind of, I don't think, going to switch that much at all. I don't really see maybe the Broncos could fall apart, but that's about all I could see really happening there. So we'll see what happens with them. But going into the NFC, we have a lot more to talk about, because the NFC has a lot of movement. And that's with the Eagles now taking over the number 2 spot in the NFC playoff picture. That's right, the Eagles, after being from in the hunt when we first started off these graphics to now, Eagles number 2 in the NFC is a pretty drastic change. We also got to see the Packers go down to 7. We got the Falcons going to 3. We got the Commanders going down to 6. They've been 2 the entire time until this moment where the Eagles now take their spot. The Lions are 8-1, and that's not even counting for the Niners, who are out of the playoffs right now at 5-4 and are struggling to keep themselves in, as the Cardinals are just taking over the NFC West, and they are at a great record right now of 6-4. So they're ahead of the Niners. They have wins in the NFC West already. So the Cardinals are a very scary team. I haven't been a person who has faith in them, but they're proving me wrong every single week. But that doesn't mean anything because, look, not all teams are great. And not all teams deserve to have to be talked about because they're in the playoffs. Sometimes you got to talk about the worst teams in the league, and that is the top 10 NFL draft picks for 2025. And right now, it's not looking good for any of these teams. The Giants are the current champions at being the worst team in football right now at 2-8. So are the Jags. They're tied right now for the number 1 overall pick. Not a lot of teams too far behind them, with the Raiders, the Titans, and the Browns all being at 2-7. They just haven't played the games yet to get them to the point where we can really say, hey, we're going to put them in the same echelon as the Giants, as the Jaguars yet. But the Jets, with Aaron Rodgers, with Devontae Adams, with Hassan Reddick, they're number 6 in the top 10. I mean, it's absolutely insane to see some of these teams. You wouldn't have thought the Patriots just getting Drake May would have made them a better team than the Jets currently, especially at week 11. We're at week 11 right now. This isn't oh man, we're week 5, week 6. Look at these teams are bad. No, this is week 11. This is the truth for these teams. These teams are going to have to start looking at the draft and seeing where they're going to be put. And the Jets are looking at a top 10 pick right now, even with their best players. So it's very interesting. We got those as the top 10 NFL picks right now. But hey, a lot of time left. A lot of things can change. A lot of things can move. Who knows? Maybe the Giants aren't number 1. Maybe it goes to the Raiders. Maybe it goes to the Jaguars. Maybe it goes to the Browns. We will not know until the end of the season. Maybe it's the Panthers. So we'll see when we get to there. But now let's move on to our actual great predictions segment, our Moose versus the Machine segment. That's right. It's my favorite time of the week, every single week. I get to show you my predictions. We get to talk about some of these teams, who's going to win, who's going to lose, how I did last week, because we gotta hold myself accountable a little bit here, right? We're still at deadlock, though. Me and the Moose Stat cannot seem to get away from being wrong in certain ways, but right in every other way. So let's get into it first with what I did right and what I did wrong. I only had 5 losses this week. I went 8-5. We had the Ravens winning, we had the Bills winning, we had the Lions winning, the Dolphins, the Niners, the Eagles, the Chargers, Chiefs, and Vikings, while the Commanders let me down, the Bears let me down, the Giants let me down, the Falcons, and the Jets. Honestly, I should have just stayed away from the New York teams. I don't know what I'm thinking sometimes when I pick these teams to win. I'm pretty sure I did the same thing this week where I said the Giants and the Jets are going to both win. Actually, no, not the Giants. They're on a bye week, so ignore that one. But let's go into the Moose Stat predictions because, look, they missed on a few as well. They missed on the Giants, the Bears, the Texans, the Rams, and the Commanders. The Commanders, I think everyone just kind of thought they were going to just dog walk the Pittsburgh Steelers, but it didn't happen. And look, it's every given Sunday. The Steelers are a legit team. I just didn't have faith in them, to be honest, to beat a team like the Commanders. But with the defense as good as theirs and with the quarterback situation playing as well as it has been with Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, it's hard to say the Steelers aren't going to be a team that beats a lot of teams that they really shouldn't or we don't think they should. So with that being said, we're going to go into my predictions for this week because, yeah, I had the Steelers winning a game this week that they really shouldn't be winning this game. And we'll go over to it when we go into our disagreements because me and the Moose Stat definitely disagree on that one. But the Eagles are one of my favorite picks this year. I think they're on a great hot streak right now. Great team, great quarterback. They're starting to find their way. The defense is starting to find its way. It's a top 2 defense right now in yards allowed per game. So great job by Philadelphia. The Packers are playing lights out. Lions. I had the Raiders actually beating Miami. We'll go over that one more later. I had the Patriots winning as well, and I had the Saints winning. I had the Bills, Steelers, of course, as you can see, and I keep on having faith in the Jets and the Bengals, but they've never done me right. So we'll go into the Moose stat predictions now, and the Moose stat predictions are those right there where we have a few agreements like the Eagles, like the Lions, like the Bengals, but we have a lot of disagreements like the Ravens winning, like the Dolphins winning, like the Rams winning. I really don't think the Rams are going to win this game either. So let's really get into our disagreements right now, and we'll break it down. So first, we have the Raiders versus the Dolphins, and the Raiders are at Miami. Miami just went from the West Coast. We're about to go back to the East Coast. It feels like a trap game to me. The Raiders are coming off of a bye week. I really like Antonio Pierce as a coach. I think he has a lot of great football ahead of him. But the Dolphins, though, my Moose stat will disagree with me on because, look, they're a great team. The defense for the Raiders has not been that good. The offense for the Raiders has not been that good. This is a total, hey, I'm just believing in the bye week as a person who's always done that. If a coach is good and they have a bye week, they normally win that game coming out of it. So I don't know if the Dolphins will win, but the Moose stat thinks they will, and I can't really disagree with them too much besides me saying that I do. So we're going to move on to the next game, which is the Patriots versus the Rams. I think the Patriots will be able to pull out a win versus the Rams, though, as I just don't think the Rams just have enough to really beat a team like this right now because I just don't. There's sometimes you just know the team's not going to win, right? And this is one of those ones for me where my gut's telling me, look, the Rams, they have a good offense. They have good pieces on the defense. Something's not going to work. They traded away their corner. They have a lot of pieces for that. There's teams like this that always go into these games and they just completely disregard the other team. So I could see them disregarding the Patriots. The Patriots don't look like they're of a team, but hey, Drake May is a great quarterback. So we'll see what he can do against the Rams. As you can see, the Moose stat disagrees with me, and that's because of all the things I said. They have a great offense. They have a great defense. They have a great coach. They've played really well this year. But at the same time, sometimes going away from West Coast to East Coast, having to switch the times, being in the morning, teams don't play that well during that time. I don't think the Rams are going to win this game, but the Moose stat does. Going into the next game, this is the biggest game that I disagree with, and of course, it's for good reason the Moose stat disagrees with me. The Ravens are such an absolute dominant team with the MVP on their team. Like Lamar Jackson's going to win the MVP. There's no one else that's going to get it. He's playing lights out. He has too good of stats now. Unless the Ravens just lose out or he gets injured, knock on wood, he doesn't. But I just don't see it happen. I see Lamar Jackson being the MVP of the league. But at the same time, it's a division game. It's in Pittsburgh. And Russell Wilson's playing lights out. The defense is playing lights out. The Steelers and Ravens also historically just split most of the time. Like they will just down the middle, they'll go, whoever plays at home first normally wins. And then the other way, they lose. So we'll see the Steelers probably lose in Baltimore, but I think the Steelers are going to win this game in Pittsburgh. The Moose stat disagrees with me because, of course, it's the MVP with Derrick Henry. Why would you ever try to bet against the MVP and how good he's playing right now? So I get it, but again, I just disagree. Division game, a lot on the line. This is for the NFC. It's for the AFC North right here. This game's a massive, massive game with a lot of implications to it for the end of the year. We'll see what happens between these two teams. But that's not all because we have our last game to go over. It's been a lot for me to talk about today. So last one, we got the Broncos. I think are going to beat the Falcons. And look, there's a lot of teams, a lot of people think that the Falcons are a really good team. I'm tired of telling people that Kirk Cousins is not as good as people think he is. He was not going to turn this team around. He just wasn't from the day he got in the building. Bijan Robinson's a generational talent. Drake London is a generational talent. So is Kyle Pitts. They have all been misused at such a rate without a quarterback that it is a shame to the Falcons and what they've done, just completely disregarding those players. You drafted Michael Penix Jr. You could have just done that in the draft and not paid Kirk Cousins $200 million plus. He's not playing the best. He's losing games that he really shouldn't, and he's winning games that he shouldn't as well. So it's a weird combo. It's a weird dynamic with him. Some games you think he's playing like he's one of the top 5 quarterbacks in the league. He had a 500 passing yard game this year. It's not like he's bad. It's just he's not a top 16 quarterback in my eyes. Or if he is, he's at the very bottom of those top 16. So I don't know how to feel about the Falcons going forward, but Moose Stat disagrees with me. They say Kirk Cousins and those generational talents are going to be able to beat the Broncos, but the Broncos almost just beat the 9-0 Chiefs. So I could really see the Falcons taking this game like it's just the Broncos. They're not that good. And the Broncos taking this game as we need to beat somebody because we should not have lost against the Chiefs. So that's how I feel about those games. That's how I feel about the week. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm your host, Chris the Moose Johnson. We had a great week. Thank you to Will, thank you to Jake, and thank you to Kyle Sparrow. As of course, I'm Chris Johnson. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you guys next week.